Was on YouTube, came across this video. So a lot of people then ask it, is it a good time to buy, especially when interest rates are going up? Let's see what these pros, these professionals, think about that question. Let's get right to it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jacob Passy, real estate and personal finance reporter at MarketWatch, and I'm thrilled to welcome Daryl Fairweather, chief economist at Redfin, and Danielle Hale, chief economist at Realtor.com. Welcome, Daryl and Danielle.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I want to set the stage quickly before we jump into our discussion. The housing market has been red hot for around 2 years now, maybe even longer, with many families across the country making big moves and buying homes left and right. But now mortgage rates are soaring, and that's happening right as the market is heading into the spring home buying season. So, Daryl, I want to start with two questions that are likely on the minds of a lot of the folks tuning in. Is now a good time to buy a home, and is now a good time to sell a home?
I know this is probably not what you expect me to say, but I think now is a very confusing time to buy a home. So I wouldn't fault anybody for just taking a couple of weeks off and waiting for the dust to settle. Mortgage rates are climbing, so the risk is that mortgage rates keep going up, and that means housing becomes more expensive. But at the same time, with everything changing in the market, it's hard to get a read on what the appropriate price is to pay for a home because competition is changing, seller expectations are changing, and it's just a kind of confusing time to be on the market.
And Danielle, what about you? What is your thoughts on those two questions?
Yeah, I think as far as a good time to buy, most people think it's not. And a lot of the conditions that Daryl mentioned with rapidly changing mortgage rates, not very many homes still the norm in many markets across the country. It's certainly not an easy time to buy. That doesn't mean it's impossible, but there is a lot going on right now. And as far as sellers, yes, you can expect to see a high price. Yes, you can probably see a lot of interested buyers checking out your home. But remember that many sellers are also buyers. And so they need to consider not just how easy it will be to sell, but also what their next move will be. And that's certainly kind of challenging in the market right now.
So both of you mentioned interest rates, and I know that is, a topic we all are covering, and it's a rapidly changing situation. Danielle, where do you see mortgage rates going? Are they going to go much higher? What is your general outlook on that environment, and then how it will affect the housing market?
When it comes to mortgage rates this year, it feels like we've been playing catch up. So every time we revise up, mortgage rates then tend to exceed our expectations. So I do think the general trajectory is going to be higher. The Fed has just started its tightening program, and that's going to tend to push rates higher. We're seeing that in longer term rates. The outlook for the economy is still good. And inflation is also tending to push up rates. So all of those factors together likely mean higher mortgage rates. Already, they're up pretty substantially, more than 2% from where they were a year ago. So that's having an impact on the housing market. We're just starting to see it, however. And so I think where we go from here, higher mortgage rates, higher costs for buyers in the market. And so a good time to reevaluate what your budget is. If you haven't checked in with your lender and you're shopping, now's probably a good time to do that and make sure that you're checking in regularly to know how these mortgage rate changes are affecting you.
On that subject and on that note, a question I get a lot from readers is, are we in a bubble right now? They see prices soaring over the past 2 years and wonder, how much higher can they go? Now we're seeing interest rates kind of surge as well. So, Daryl, what is your take on that? Do you think the housing market is in a bubble, or is something else going on here?
I think what's happening is we fundamentally have too little supply and a lot of demand, especially with millennials entering into home buying age. there is a whole generational wave of home buyers, and we just didn't build enough homes for them, and that's not going to slow down for the next 10 years. But I am comforted to know that mortgage rates are going up because it does reduce the risk of a bubble forming. What we don't want to see is people starting to get the expectation that prices will go up this much every single year. That leads to risky behavior. It leads to speculation. It leads to people treating their home like a speculative asset instead of a place to live. And that is unhealthy for the housing market. So it's definitely the silver lining of the housing market slowing down is that at least it will be in a healthier place.
Speaking of speculative behavior, another subject I get a lot of questions about is investors and their role in the housing market. And, you see a lot of folks, buyers out there complaining about going up against all cash offers that they think are coming from investors. So are investors buying up as many homes as it seems they are? And, how are investors affecting the market? Danielle, why don't we go to you on that one?
Yeah, so investors are more active in today's housing market than they have been in the past. We're seeing greater shares of buyers. Of note, investors don't just buy homes, they also sell homes. And so that can be a helpful contribution. But in today's market, we are generally seeing investors operate more as buyers than sellers. So in today's housing market, they're the competition for hopeful home buyers. And it does mean that you have to be prepared to act quickly if that is your competition. Now, just because you need to act quickly in a housing market that remains relatively competitive doesn't mean you want to get carried away. So a good way to navigate that is to be prepared, to know what your budget is and really stick to that. Maybe search for homes that are priced a bit below your budget so you have some wiggle room to move up if you need to in your offering price. And also know what your must-haves are and what factors you're willing to be flexible on and maybe make compromises on. So that way, when you do put an offer, it's a home that really fits your needs and what you're looking for.
And Daryl, speaking of investors and companies buying and selling real estate, another trend in recent years is the trend of iBuying. Redfin is an iBuyer, as are companies like Opendoor and OfferPad. Zillow used to be one, but they've exited that business more or less. A lot of folks across the country have seen these companies come into their market fairly recently, and that side of the business, the real estate business, is definitely growing. What do you think buyers and sellers need to know about working with an iBuyer?
An iBuyer is really just one of the many options you have as a seller. There are options from light touch, where you just do most of the work yourself and the real estate agent helps you through the transaction. And there's heavier touch, where the real estate agent will do things like stage the home or help you with landscaping. And then I consider iBuying to be the option that is really easiest for the seller. They don't really have to do anything. They just get their bag of cash and they can move out when they want to and kind of do things on their terms. Now, it does come with an extra fee, so it is one of the more expensive options for sellers, but I think every seller is different, and it's generally a good thing that there are so many options for sellers. It's really difficult for people who are going from being a seller to being a buyer, and that kind of certainty of knowing exactly what your home is selling for so you can move on and be a really competitive buyer, I think is really attractive right now.
Just a quick reminder for everyone tuning in, if you have any questions for our panelists, please go ahead and submit them using the chat box on the screen. Before I move on to another topic, Danielle, what are your thoughts on working with some of these newer companies that are in the marketplace? Do you think that there's anything that, especially sellers, because I feel like it's attractive to sellers right now and can offer a bit more freedom, when, like you said, it's a tough market for them too, just because most times they're going to be looking for a new home themselves. So, a seller might be attracted to easing the process by working with an iBuyer, but is there any red flags, or what should they be thinking about when working with one?
Yeah, well, as Daryl mentioned, it's convenient to work with an iBuyer, but that convenience does come at a price. So you may end up with a little bit less cash when you're moving on to your next home as a seller working with an iBuyer. It may be worth that for the convenience, or you may want to take the biggest amount of money that you can out of your home so you can parlay that into a new home, since we all know that homes are more expensive now. So that's another consideration to think through. If you're exploring your options as a seller, even if if you've done this before, if you haven't sold a home in several years, you will find that there are many more options available to you than ever before. If you want to sell now, move later, or maybe sell now and get the cash up front so you can use it on your next home. You can explore a variety of options online, and even sellers, as I said, who've done this before will want to check out what their option set is before deciding how exactly they want to proceed with their home sale. And they may find that some of these newer business models are quite a bit more convenient for them than how they've sold their home traditionally in the past.
Shifting gears a little bit. So one question that I think is on the mind for a lot of buyers, especially first-time buyers in particular, obviously, is to buy versus rent. But even, I have friends who sold homes, but because of how competitive the market is, they opted to rent rather than just buying a new home to move into. So how should home buyers of all stripes consider whether or not to buy or to continue renting or become a renter, given rising home prices, rising interest rates? Daryl, why don't we go to you on that one?
Right now, home prices, mortgage rates, and rents are all going up at the same time, which means that there's really any great option for people who are looking to move right now. One way to tell if you should buy versus rent is just how long you're going to stay in the same place. If you're going to stay in the same place for at least 5 years, then usually buying will yield you greater wealth. You can build equity, and no matter whether the housing market slows down or speeds up over a 5-year period, you should make out with a profit. And another option to consider is moving somewhere completely new. A lot of people who are faced with rising rents and rising home prices are looking around and thinking, well, maybe I can move somewhere else and get more disposable income. And given that remote work is now an option and the labor market is incredibly tight all around the country, many people are taking that option. So if you feel like you're priced out of your local housing market, you might want to explore a nearby housing market.
And Danielle, do you also have any thoughts on this? I know Realtor.com, this is I think you all put out a report on buying versus renting. So how do you go about deciding that and weighing those two options?
Yeah, so you can look at the current costs. House prices are up, rents are up, so it's more expensive no matter where you're going to live. In some markets, you'll find that buying locally is cheaper than rent locally. In a lot of markets, that's not the case. It's roughly half and half. The bigger, more well-established markets, you'll find it's more expensive to buy. But as Daryl noted, if you're going to be in a market for a long time, even if it's more expensive today, if rents continue to go up, you will actually end up making out better financially because you're paying down some of your housing costs into your mortgage each month, so building up your equity, and you won't face cost increases from rent hikes in the future because most buyers take out a fixed rate mortgage, and so you'll have the bulk of your housing costs locked in. So that can end up being a better decision. But if you're not able to make that purchase in the market where you live, considering moving out to the suburbs where homes tend to generally be more affordable, or to another market entirely can be a good way of making that transition and still keeping your housing costs relatively affordable. In addition to that buy versus rent study, we also do a lot of cross-market demand analysis where we look at where people are and where they're searching from. And we do see a trend of people looking from expensive markets to relatively more affordable markets in the Sun Belt or in the Midwest to really make their housing dollars stretch further.
So I think we'll stop right here. One of the questions that Jacob asked Daryl and Danielle, is it a good time to buy? Personally, I don't think it's a good time to buy because interest rates are at almost 8% right now as of October of 2022. I think it'll be better for, especially if you're a first-time home buyer, to wait next year. Hopefully by next year, interest rates will start to go down, but right now the interest rates are going up, up, up. So they're not going to say not to buy because their job, Danielle worked for Realtor.com and Daryl worked for Redfin. And their job is, selling real estate, selling and buying. They're in the industry where you buy and sell real estate, so they're not going to tell you guys not to buy. But now's not the time to buy. If I were a first-time home buyer, I would wait. Also, they talked about whether you should buy or rent. Obviously, like Daryl said, It's better to buy because you can build equity within your home as time goes on, as opposed to, if you're renting, you don't have the, your rent can go up year to year, and then you're not building equity. And Danielle even said it. At least when you buy, there's a fixed rate, and you're set to pay that certain amount each year, as opposed to renting. Rent usually goes up every year. So obviously, I think buying is better. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next video. Yay, yay!